Welcome back, everybody. My name is Leanne Alexander, coming to you from UPCI headquarters. So excited to have with us again Stephanie Gosser from Able Ministry. And we're going to continue this conversation we started in a previous video about ministering to individuals with disability. It's an important topic, and we as a church must rise to meet this need. And so I want to get started by digging in a little more about, for teachers specifically, some methods of support. So in our last video, we began talking about how a teacher can minister to children who have any number of special needs. So maybe you can talk to us in a little more detail. I know one of the phrases that we hear is the phrase sensory processing issues. Mm-hmm. Okay, so help those of us out who hear this and we're not sure exactly what that means and what do we do. So maybe take it away.
Sure. So sensory processing issues refer to our five senses.
Okay.
And it's when the volume, so to speak, is turned up or turned down.
Okay.
So let's just take one for example. One that affects my family greatly is sensitivity to sound.
Okay.
So think about our normal worship service,
Ooh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
How loud that can get. If a person has a sensory issue with sound, that volume, so to speak, could be turned up. So instead of 85 decibels, it might sound like 160 decibels.
Okay.
So as you can imagine, walk into a 160 decibel worship service, it might cause some anxiety, right?
Certainly.
And so some things that we can do with that is you can provide earplugs,
Okay.
noise canceling headphones.
Right.
In some severe situations, the person might need to leave the sanctuary and be in another room streaming the service.
Sure.
Some churches have nurseries that have like windows that look out into the sanctuary with a monitor. That's another solution. The other thing that can be sensitive is your eyes. So like super bright lights might be overwhelming. In the Sunday school classroom, we often have fluorescent lighting, and you know how those bulbs can sometimes get wiggy, and then they cause that flickering, which can be very overwhelming to a person who has sight sensitivity. There are people who have sensitivity to smells. So perfume, we all love our perfume and smelling so lovely, right? Or even hairspray or lotion can be overwhelming and cause somebody to gag and feel like they're going to be sick. On the other end, so that's oversensitive. On the other end, there's undersensitive.
Okay.
So these are the people who, in the area of sound, they love loud. So in children's church, you know how that children's church person always gets up and says, "I can't hear you."
Right.
And the kids are like, "Yes!"
Sure.
They love that.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, on the opposite end, they might leave the room about that time. There are kids that love sensory input to their sense of touch. So they love to jump and they love to crash. These are kids that if they crash into a table, they just keep on going because it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
They don't feel it quite as much. If they're standing in line and they crash into their neighbor, like their neighbor might be like, "They hurt me," and they're just ready to go because they're a little less responsive to pain and senses. So that, in a nutshell, is what sensory integration is.
Wow. Well, a lot for teachers to be thinking about as they evaluate the needs of their classroom. What are some other, I love some of these things you're mentioning to help us accommodate. So maybe talk to us about some other types of support teachers can provide in their classes.
Sure. So for kids that are light sensitive, something that you could provide is sunglasses.
Okay.
Now that may seem crazy, like who lets kids wear sunglasses in their classroom, but for the kid that's light sensitive, that might be a need. For the kid that gets overwhelmed with movement and activity, they might need a break. Mm-hmm. So you might need to assign a person to that child to give them a break and leave the room and then come back in when things are calmer. There are sometimes at the beginning of Sunday school, you know how it's crazy and like kids are coming in and there's a lot of movement and a lot of noise. It might be necessary to take a child and say, "You know what? Why don't you come in later? Or why don't you come in earlier when it's a little bit more quiet?" The other thing for kids that have difficulty focusing or paying attention in class, you might have a peer, like they might have a buddy who can help them.
Right.
So if they start to wander, come back and sit beside me, that type of thing. So you can do adult support, you can do peer support, or you could just have an extra teacher in the classroom.
Excellent. Very helpful. And I know our teachers are going to appreciate just those thoughts to jumpstart some ways to support. And like you said in a previous video, we can consult with the family, figure out ways that we can custom that support based on the needs of that individual student. Okay, so we've talked a lot in the last video and in this video about ministering to children with a special need. What about with our adults and youth? What would ministry look like in that context?
That's a good question. So sensory issues don't go away as you get older.
Okay.
Like in some cases they do, but you could still have a teenager, an adult who is sound sensitive, for
Right.
example. The other thing to think about with disabilities and older kids is what is their cognitive level. And so if you have a 13-year-old who cognitively is a lot less than that, you might want to keep them in a younger class. And I mean, of course, talk to the parent and figure out,
Certainly.
you know, between the family and you. But we have a 13-year-old in our Sunday school who's actually in the elementary class just because it's younger, it's more simple teaching or
Right.
movement. It works
Right.
better for that child.
Right. So that's a good case in point. Again, we're back to having that conversation with the teacher and the family members, sitting down, figuring out the needs of the individual. Very, very important. Okay, so we've talked about some help for teachers. Let's back up for a moment. If maybe a team of teachers or a Sunday school director or the pastor, any church leaders we have watching, if they decided, you know what, we want to formalize a ministry to individuals with disability, if they wanted to structure something in their church, what would that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it can run, talk about spectrum disorder,
Sure.
it can run the spectrum.
Okay.
It can run the gamut. So on one hand, you could have a team of people who are available to be buddies. You could have support that reaches out to the community, that provides respite care for individuals. For 3 hours on Saturday, they can bring their kid, they can drop them off.
Okay.
There are churches that do support groups
Sure.
for caregivers. So that's like this end of the spectrum. At a minimum, you need a disability coordinator.
Okay.
And what a disability coordinator does is a family arrives with a child with a disability. They meet with that family, get that child into a Sunday school class, and then coordinate between the family and the teacher and make sure that that child is supported.
Excellent.
So it might be, having a meeting with the parent and the teacher and going through the IEP, the spiritual IEP,
Right.
perhaps,
Right.
which is that form that clearly defines what supports they need. Or it might just be checking in with the teacher and saying, is everything okay? Are they good? And the teacher says yes, and then there's no additional thing needed. If you have a spiritual IEP, we recommend that the disability coordinator follow up at least once a year and just look at that and make sure it's still relevant.
Excellent. Okay, you've mentioned the spiritual IEP. In a previous video, we explained what's available in that. It's a very helpful tool. Talk to us about where it's at, if a church wants to take advantage of that, and any other resources that might help teachers, churches in addressing these needs in the church.
Thanks. Yes. There are two really important documents that are electronic and online.
Okay.
And they are the spiritual IEP, which is basically just a form that you fill out that helps you define what supports are needed in the classroom. And then we have a packet of information, and both of these we've worked with curriculum.
Right.
We have a packet of information that is like the top 10 disabilities that you might run into.
Oh, very good.
And so if a person walks into your class and they have Down syndrome, for example, and you don't know anything about Down syndrome, you can go to this packet, flip through, find the Down syndrome page, pull that out, and read it. It's back and front, and it's just really simple, really quick. This is what you need to know about Down syndrome. Here's some additional resources you can go to, websites which are helpful. So just like a starting point. So both of those documents are on our Facebook page, Able Ministry UPCI. So they're in the file section. The other thing that's on our Facebook page is just a bunch of people. So if you have somebody in your class and you're like, I don't know what to do with this person, this kid is driving me crazy, or they're not driving me crazy at all, they're just sitting off in a corner and they're not doing anything,
Yeah.
what can I do? How can I reach out to them? post that on our Facebook page. We have people who have taught in special ed for 20 years. We have therapists. We have a bunch of parents, and just people who are interested, and they will help you figure that out.
That is beautiful. What a gift Able is to our fellowship. We're so thankful for that ministry. So teachers, we want to encourage you to get connected with Able, and through the Facebook, through the website. And I want to thank you on behalf of Curriculum from Pentecostal Publishing House, because your insight and resources like this that we've been able to work together, collaborate on, I know are going to be a blessing to our teachers who care about this need. They want to address it, but just getting started. Able has been a huge help in starting us down that pathway. So teachers, thank you for tuning in. Please get connected with Able. You can contact the team there for more information and more help. And together we're going to rise up and meet this need. I know maybe some teachers are out there listening as you're talking through the support, and they may say, oh, wow, how... It's worth making the investment, making the sacrifice to think beyond just my usual Sunday. And let's do what we can to help support our families who are facing any type of disability. So thank you for bringing that need to our attention and for all the work you're doing to give us practical tools to meet it. We are very grateful.
Thank you.
We're very grateful. Thank you for tuning in. Get connected with Able, and we'll be back with more training videos next month.